Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for being so prompt. We're going to wait a couple of minutes for the ranking member and one of the other committee members who went to the wrong hearing room to show up. So thank you for your patience. Subcommittee on Interior, Energy, and the Environment will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to thank the panel for being here. I'll begin with my opening statement. Good morning. The Subcommittee on Interior, Energy, and the Environment is meeting today to discuss barriers to energy development on tribal lands. According to the most recent census report, Native Americans are almost twice as likely to live in poverty than the general population. On reservations throughout the country, unemployment rates are higher and per capita income is lower than national averages. Meanwhile, tribal lands contain a wealth of untapped energy resources. According to one estimate, tribal lands contain nearly 30% of America's coal reserves west of the Mississippi and as much as 20% of the known natural gas and oil reserves. In my home state of Montana, the Crow Nation alone contains approximately 9 billion tons of coal. Energy development projects on tribal lands can create jobs, opportunity, and a valuable source of revenue for tribal members. Despite the many positive economic benefits tribes can reap from developing their energy resources, the federal government makes it extremely difficult for them to do so. Most tribal land is held in trust by the federal government. The trust relationship charges government agencies, primarily the Bureau of Indian Affairs within the Department of Interior, with ensuring that tribal lands and resources are well managed. Instead, the government has saddled tribes with a series of regulatory burdens. First, the energy development projects on tribal lands cost more than comparable projects on private property or even other non-tribal federal lands. For example, in the state of Colorado, there is no fee for applying for a drilling permit on privately owned land. However, BLM charges almost $10,000 for a similar drilling permit on tribal land. Not only is development on tribal lands more expensive, the process is also more complex. On tribal lands, acquiring the necessary permits for a project requires working with a minimum of 4 federal agencies and completing 49 different steps. On private land, permits can be obtained in as few as 4 steps. The added complexity of permitting process on tribal lands goes hand in hand with regulatory delays that make developing tribal energy resources an uphill battle fought at great costs to tribes. Even the most simple of tasks can fall prey to the bureaucracy. One tribe reported waiting 6 years for BIA to complete a routine title search, something that takes a matter of days for a piece of private property. Another tribe represented at today's hearing lost an estimated $95 million on a single project while waiting years for BIA to approve right-of-way agreements. Given these challenges, it should come as no surprise that many operators are discouraged from pursuing projects on tribal lands. These added costs and burdens create unnecessary impediments for tribes that wish to make decisions about how to use their own land, and they disadvantage tribes in comparison to similarly situated private landowners. Studies abound documenting the government's shameful mismanagement of tribal resources. In 2017, the Government Accountability Office added tribal energy programs to their list of federal programs most at risk of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, citing a decade's worth of research. Fortunately, GAO also made a number of associated recommendations to help BIA improve its management of tribal resources, and BIA has reported progress towards implementing them. Today's hearing will provide an opportunity for the committee to hear from the tribes about whether any of the changes BIA has implemented to date have had an impact. Most importantly, the testimony we hear today will highlight the biggest challenges tribes face when they want to develop their own valuable energy resources. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about their experiences and especially their suggestions for an ongoing path to a future where tribes face fewer obstacles in using your land, their resources as they see fit. Before we begin, without objection, I'd like to submit for the record testimony from the Property and Environment Research Center, a think tank based in Montana, and thank them for contributing to the conversation on tribal energy issues. I would now like to recognize my good friend, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Plaskett, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you for the testimony and the expertise you're going to be providing for this committee during this hearing. Because many tribal communities are economically reliant on development of energy resources on their lands, but face barriers to using those resources, I'm glad we are devoting a hearing that will address continuing concerns and air solutions. 17 months ago, the Government Accountability Office High Risk Report has outlined several problems that the tribes across the country face in the areas of energy, healthcare, and education. The report characterized the Bureau of Indian Affairs' handling of tribal energy resources as mismanagement, full of delays that cost revenue to struggling tribes. One of the impediments to well-managed energy development is a failure to invest in a federal workforce to provide expertise that many tribes lack. I, coming from the Virgin Islands, understand When people can, on one hand, tell you that you're mismanaging and that you have not used resources appropriately, but they have not actually given you the appropriate resources with which to get the job done initially. In fact, President Trump's hiring freeze and reorganization have aggravated that problem. BIA needs more funding to assist responsible energy development on tribal lands, not the status quo or possible cuts. As Russell Begay, president of the Navajo Nation, told a Department of Interior panel a year ago, quote, "Reducing the size of the BIA could affect the fulfillment of the trust duties the U.S. has to tribes. The BIA should be filled with experts. We need the BIA to bring in economists, technology experts, and energy and resource engineers to help tribes develop the resources on their land." I know, as I said, from our experience in the U.S. Virgin Islands, that funding and expertise from the federal government can make a crucial difference in the lives of many. We also have severe energy issues. From 2009 to 2013, our islands developed and began implementing a long-term strategy to transition from reliance on fossil fuel to a clean, sustainable energy future. With financial assistance from DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy and from the Interior Department's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the U.S. Virgin Islands has thoroughly evaluated its clean energy opportunities and made a $65 million investment in solar power. The Department of Energy and technical experts from its renewable energy worked with our Water and Power Authority to identify the best combination of energy technologies for the Virgin Islands to meet its clean energy goal. In 2012, a $60,000 grant from the Department of Interior led to the development of a network of engineers, contractors, and financiers who assisted the Virgin Islands power customers in implementing clean energy projects. We needed and appreciated both the financing and the expertise provided by both the Department of Energy, working with the Department of Interior to help the Virgin Islands reach its clean energy goals. Likewise, such federal investments, not only of dollars, but also of expertise, both technically as well as through support through the process, is vital in the effort to eventually transition tribes to capable management of their resources. Proposals to simply give tribes more autonomy without investing more expertise, to give them the financial resources they need, as well as guide them through complicated processes involving environmental laws, rights of way, and leases, could leave some tribes open to exploitation or other harm. I'm concerned that President Trump's and Secretary Zinke's proposed reorganization could severely compromise the ability of BIA and the Department of Energy's Office of Indian Energy and Economic Development from providing the expertise many tribes need. I'm asking that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle look to ensuring that any DOI or reorganization does not further impede the BIA from fulfilling its trust responsibility and give the BIA the resources and staffing it needs to ensure the best energy future for all the tribal communities. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I look forward to the testimony and the questions to follow.
Yes, thank you. And I'm very pleased to introduce our panel today. I want to thank each one of you for traveling here. I understand you went through some circuitous routes and lost some sleep, but it's good to have you here all smiling on the panel. First, the Honorable Alvin Not Afraid Jr., Chairman of the Crow Tribe of Indians in my home state of Montana. The Honorable Adam Redd, Councilman of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. Mr. Eric Henson, Executive Vice President of Compass Lexicon. And Mr. Christopher Deschene, Partner at Rosette LLP. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. Please remain seated and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to or affirm the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? The record will reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for our discussion here today, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written testimony will become part of the permanent record, however. As a reminder, the clock in front of you shows your remaining time. The light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds left and red when your time is up. Also, please remember to press the button to turn the microphone on. It does not work automatically. So with that, I'd like to recognize Chairman Nonafraid for your testimony.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Gianforte, Ranking Member Plaskett, and Member Palmer. Also the members that serve on this panel, very important subcommittee we have here. I appreciate the opportunity to share my views and the views of the people I represent regarding the impediments to energy production in Indian country. My name is Alvin Nonafraid Jr. I'm the chairman of the Crow Tribe of Indians. We are more than 14,000 members strong, and we own more than 2.2 million acres in the west along the Bighorn River. Our land is rich in energy resources, natural resources, and minerals. So this topic is close to the hearts of the Crow people. The Crow tribe owns 9 billion ton of mineable coal, constituting 3% of the U.S. reserves, yet we only have one active mine. Colorado-based Westmoreland Resources currently leases the Absolica mine, which has existed since 1974. We love our land and our homes, but our inability to grow our local economy through the development of our energy resources ensures that we will never rise out of the cycle of poverty that we find ourselves in today. While every impediment we face cannot be fixed by the federal government, many of them can, such as 1, cumbersome Indian coal and oil gas approval processes, 2, long wait times for those approvals, 3, numerous federal agencies and offices both within and beyond the Bureau of Indian Affairs that must grant approval for energy development contracts to move forward. 4, cumbersome regulations promulgated without meaningful consultation with energy tribes. Though we are appreciative of the work done to repeal many of those in this last year by the administration. 5, poorly kept and incomplete records from which critical decisions must be made. 6, inexperienced bureaucrats who oversee the entire approval process. Barriers to economic development cost Indians millions of dollars in lost revenue. If the Crow tribe wants to enter into an oil gas lease on a land that the tribe owns, we face a process of long wait times, usually years, for approval. We also face bureaucracy. The BIA was created long ago in part because it was thought that Indians could not intellectually evaluate business contracts, purchase agreements, leases, and other economic tools. Yet, in an ironic twist of fate, it is now the BIA. According to the GAO and Interior's OIG, that lacks the intellectual capacity to evaluate business contracts, purchase agreements, leases, and other energy development mechanisms. Consider this from the viewpoint of a businessman. This will be easy exercise for you, Mr. Chairman. Being a self-made and highly successful businessman yourself, would you have asked a random tourist with no knowledge of your company who was passing through Bozeman to approve a purchase agreement you wish to make? As CEO of Right Now Technologies, I'm sure you would not have, they do not have the expertise that you do about your company. So it doesn't make any sense, right? And that's exactly how we feel at the Crow Nation. It'll take time to roll back the oppressive regulations that the previous administration used to perpetuate the war on coal, and we appreciate all the work that has been done to date by this Congress and this administration. All of us in government roles during this time are in the same predicament. From the President to Congress to me as chairman, we all find that we are fixing problems not of our making and certainly not of our choosing. So how can we work together to fix these problems? I advocate for the following. 1, at home, I'm working with federal investigators to clean up decades of financial mismanagement and codify oversight controls within our government. These are self-help steps that we are taking in order to be accountable for our own welfare and to create a healthy atmosphere for private investment in Crow. 2, at the congressional level, I asked you to co-sponsor and support S-245, sponsored by the Senator Hoeven and passed by the Senate in December of 2017. I believe that we will correct these issues currently stifling progression of the Tribal Energy Resource Agreement mechanism. If these fixes become law, it is my intention to ensure that the Crow Tribe is the first to apply for and enter into a TERRA agreement with the Secretary of Interior. 3, finally, I urge you to continue to seek the expertise of organizations that are educating tribal leaders, federal elected officials, and future generations as to the best ways to promote private economies in Indian country. Specifically, the research of Dr. Terry Anderson at the Hoover Institute and the tribal leaders of Alliance for Renewing Indigenous Economies. Their scholarship is groundbreaking, and it remains some of the only, such as reservation-based, free market-focused decisions, and in the public sphere today. In closing, while most of us recognize the barriers of tribal energy development, the answers are not simple. We are trying to free up economies on the reservation underneath a complex framework of mixed government ownership of assets. Our nation-to-nation relationship means that we are all caught in a delicate web of legal promises and historical responsibilities, as well as racial and cultural sensitivities. So at this time, I would like to thank Chairman Gianforte for the invite to speak on behalf of Crow Tribe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And Councilman Redd, you're recognized for your 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Gianforte, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the subcommittee. I am Adam Redd, an elected member of the Southern Indian Tribal Council. Thank you for inviting us to testify. Our tribe's story attests to our ability to responsibly manage our own natural resources. We are an example of the positive impact of federal legislation that allows tribes to assume a greater role in energy development on their reservations. Federal laws require federal review and approval of most realty transactions involving Indian lands and minerals. Our tribal leadership has always believed that we could do a better job of managing our resources than would federal agencies. Unlike federal agencies, we have a vested interest in protecting our resources and maximizing economic returns for those resources. In keeping with that philosophy, we have taken advantage of most congressionally created opportunities to exercise self-determination, like the Indian Mineral Development Act of 1982. The IMDA allowed tribes to negotiate their own leases, subject, of course, to BIA approval. With that important legislation, we negotiated favorable terms in our oil and gas leases, which the United States didn't have the incentive to negotiate for on our behalf. Less than 50 years ago, our tribe had to stop distributing per capita payments to tribal members because we couldn't afford them. Today, the tribe's oil and gas companies conduct activities in several western states. We also invest in non-energy projects, including real estate properties across the country. Today, the tribe provides health insurance for its tribal members and promises all members access to a college education. We're the largest employer in our region, and we're the only tribe in the nation with a AAA credit rating from Standard & Poor's. We've been successful despite the obstacles created by underfunded and understaffed federal agencies like the BIA. Those obstacles are a very real problem because they create a significant disincentive to developing oil and gas on tribal land. For example, please cue the slide. Permitting a well on private land typically takes 4 months. Permitting a well on tribal land can take more like 30 months. A drilling permit from the state for drilling on private land is free. A drilling permit from the BLM to drill on tribal land is $9,500. Tribal land is treated like public land and is subject to NEPA and a public comment process. Private land is not. On reservations like Southern Ute, where private land and tribal land are interspersed, drilling on private land is significantly faster and cheaper, and an operator can drill on private land and still drain tribal minerals. Please take down the slide. We're grateful for the new attention GAO and OIG have brought to this issue, but there is a lot of work to be done. We have some suggestions. Enact S-245, which will allow tribes to choose to play a larger role in the energy development process while the United States plays a smaller role. This is a solution that could be achieved without increasing federal funding or staffing. BIA must recruit realty staff in order to process our transactions. At the Southern Ute Agency, we've had 2 realty specialist positions that have been vacant for several years. Recently, the agency extended 2 offers to fill those positions, but one of the selected applicants ultimately declined her offer after the Bureau failed to approve the incentive package in a timely manner. BIA always tells us they can't hire people here because of the high cost of living in our region. We need a cost of living adjustment from OPM for our area. BIA must hire and train people to work on TAMs, so that the BIA can verify land ownership information in a timely manner. With more TAMS trainings, more BIA staff devoted to TAMS, and loosening of the requirements for tribally funded staff to do TAMS encoding, this situation could be improved. Interior must define inherently federal functions. Under the Energy Policy Act of 2005, Congress established a mechanism called a TERA that allows tribes to enter into an energy-related realty transactions without prior BIA review and approval. This would have been a dramatic improvement, but the implementing regulations created an unlegislated, undefined exception to the scope of TERA. The implementing regulations say a tribe may not assume inherently federal functions. Despite our numerous requests, Interior refuses to define that term. Contrary to GAO's recent findings, the BIA has failed to resolve this regulatory blockage. Another suggestion we have is that Congress act to accelerate environmental studies under NEPA and ensure timely NHPA compliance. In conclusion, our tribe, like many other tribes, is well equipped to utilize our energy resources. We need more support for tribal self-determination, for tribes willing to assume responsibility for managing their energy resources. We believe that this approach should be at the forefront of any congressional oversight and action taken in response to GAO's and OIG's reports. The tribe appreciates the continued efforts of this Congress, this subcommittee, and others to encourage tribal self-determination through economic and energy development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And Mr. Henson, you're recognized for your 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you. My name is Eric Henson. I'm a research fellow at the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development, and I work full-time at an economics consulting firm out of Boston. I've done about 20-something years of tribal affairs, and I'm very happy to be here speaking with you today. The Harvard Project started about 30 years ago with a very simple question. There's this observation that some tribes that seem to have great natural resource endowments weren't quite taking off and doing so well, poor socioeconomic outcomes. Other tribes which had no apparent access to the kind of resources you might expect would lend themselves to great economic outcomes were doing just fine. So a couple of researchers at Harvard, I was only in high school at the time, so I was not there, set out in a rental car to kind of investigate this question. And these guys found over time that what really mattered were a couple of things that nearly sound self-explanatory today, but were kind of revolutionary at the time. Capable governing institutions on the part of tribes were really important. You know, the word bureaucrat or bureaucracy kind of has a negative connotation sometimes, but in terms of government, someone needs to show up on Monday morning and keep the wheels of government working. And this applies to tribes no more or less than the federal government, states, municipalities. It's really important to have the right kinds of institutions in place. Secondly, having a form of government that comports with the norms that the citizenry sees as the right way to govern the community is really important. And not every place has that. Lots of tribal governments for a long time were kind of imposed by outside entities and didn't square up with how the people thought about governing themselves at all. And finally, most relevant to today, the single most important thing that was helping tribes grow their economies in a sustainable manner was self-determination, tribal sovereignty, putting the decision-making process in the hands of those, like the two gentlemen next to me, who are right there on the ground. Now, what we found and what I argue today is that that doesn't necessarily mean abandoning the U.S. federal government's responsibilities to the tribes. In fact, I would argue for a recommitment to that. Ms. Plaskett echoed this a little bit. There's no reason why tribal control of decision-making processes, sensible regulations, undoing multiple overlapping layers of unnecessary regulatory schemes, et cetera, that doesn't have to be counter to the notion of providing the right kind of resources. If the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to take the most obvious example, is going to go out and attract dozens and dozens of highly technical employees over the next several decades, which is going to be important given the retirement numbers that are coming its way. Those people, you're competing with private industry to lure people to places like the Durango, Colorado area. And they're expensive. And there are just some silly impediments to getting those people. There's a lack of local advertising for the right staff. There's this inability to just pay a cost of living adjustment to get the right people there. And it's also important to keep in mind, you're not going to necessarily lure someone to a remote location, be it the Virgin Islands or the Durango area, and have them start on day one as an expert. A lot of these jobs take decades and decades of expertise. Now, recommitting through the appropriations process to the right kind of staffing and funding for the BIA and all the other departments that oversee energy development is doubly important. Not only to put the right staff in place to interface with folks like Councilman Redd and Chairman Not Afraid, but also, think about it, if you're in a place that's kind of remote, that faces brain and drain, you have an underdeveloped economy, small population, the appeal of the big city is always there. You're trying to convince these people to devote their careers to a life in an energy development area that's often small population, far from urban centers. So the BIA or other departments can be a viable career alternative, not just for outsiders, but for tribal citizens as well. At Crow, there are plenty of people who could really benefit from a stable, long-term governmental job. And that could be working hand in hand with the tribe in developing its energy resources. And the last thing I'll say before I pass the mic is, there are several legislative ideas out there that would impose, say, deadlines on the BIA or other things of that nature. But imposing artificial deadlines without providing the right resources to meet those deadlines is not in service to Indian country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Henson. And now we'll recognize Mr. Deschene. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, please, go ahead. You have 5 minutes. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yat e bene. Good morning, Chairman Giaforte and Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Deschene. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation and a partner with Rosette LLP, which is a national tribal law firm. I'm here also with Councilman Leon Raval from the Hickory Apache Nation, northern New Mexico. As a member of the as a former director for Indian Energy at DOE, I'm here to share my thoughts and recommendations for improving tribal energy development within Indian country. As my people say, which means educate them all. With regards to the policy challenges, there are 4 general reasons underlying tribal energy issues and undermining the federal tribal energy policy. These are 1, the federal government's antiquated land policies, 2, federal courts' use of judiciary plenary power, and 3, the inability of Congress to pass comprehensive tribal energy legislation and dedicate adequate resources. 4 are the paternalistic, inefficient, and archaic bureaucracy of the executive branch and its agencies. With respect to Congress, congressional elections over the last 12 years have hurt Indian energy development. Tribal energy bills designed to continue the work started under Title V of the Energy Policy Act have all stalled due to inaction. Similarly, at the executive, there are a number of policies that have also encumbered energy development. These include inadequate staffing and support for project reviews and key energy positions. Federal agencies have also minimized the budget needed to provide adequate and meaningful services and financial support to tribal energy development programs. Changing the tribal energy paradigm requires tribal resources, including water, land, minerals, and labor to help solve our country's energy challenges. Tribal leaders have always argued that they must be part of the equation and solutions offered by our country's energy industry. Accordingly, tribal leaders have recommended the following, and based upon my observations, Congress should continue tracking the implementation of the GA report recommendations from the 15, 16, and 17 reports. Congress should also consider passing national tribal energy legislation that updates, amends, and supports tribal leadership recommendations. The Hearth Act should be amended to allow tribes to approve leases and easements for tribal energy development. At the Department of Energy, Congress should consider and fund the Office of Indian Energy at DOE at, and this is a big ask, $100 million with 25 full-time employees. That office has been charged with national service and is operating at a substandard level with less than 4 employees at times. Congress should also look at creating a Senate-confirmed Assistant Secretary of Indian Energy at DOE as well. Additionally, Congress should allocate and authorize funds for the Tribal Energy Loan Guarantee Program at a minimum of $100 million. I know that the former senator from Minnesota had looked at this effort. That should be picked up again as well. Finally, Congress should look at tribal energy partnerships by supporting DOE's Office of Indian Energy's Strategic Roadmap 2025 that enumerates a number of goals, including the build-out of tribal businesses and their roundtables to help foster tribal energy development from the industry. With regards to the administration, again, the GAO reports are instructive. They should also look at the implementation of a 5 to 10-year budget plan with regards to funding for DOE and DOI with OMB. Given that my time is running short, I'd like to just talk a little bit about policy as well. With regards to policy, the federal government should look at funding agency programs throughout the government. Programs that build tribal capacity, education, and workforce development are important. With regards to transmission, planning, access, studies, and ownership are all vital and should be supported as well. Renewable energy standards, incentives, and partnerships are key to help tribes build out the renewable energy programs. And cross-agency coordination is very important, given that DOE and DOI has started the process in the last few years. And finally, strengthen and improve the consultation and coordination process when it comes to working with tribes throughout the country. In conclusion, no message resonates better than success. As noted, dedicated resources and funding investments are vital to success in the Indian country. I thank you for allowing me to share a few of these recommendations. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the panel for your insightful testimony. We'll now move to questions, and I'd like to recognize Mr. Palmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Henson, what does the Indian community stand to gain as far as employment growth if the regulations are reduced or simplified?
That's an interesting question, and I have not quantified it personally. I would certainly be interested in looking into that and getting back to you if that's a possibility.
Listening to the testimony of Chairman Not Afraid and Councilman Redd, it's obvious that it would be an economic benefit to the tribes, not only in revenue, but in jobs. And I see Chairman Not Afraid nodding. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Palmer. First of all, I've observed and analyzed that for every 2 million tons of coal being developed creates a minimum of 120 well-paid jobs for the Crow people.
Say that again, how many well-paid jobs?
120. Mm-hmm. And the average annual salary is about $80K.
$80,000, that's a very high-paying salary in Montana, I believe, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask you this, and this is for Chairman Not Afraid, Councilman Redd. What other energy resources are available on tribal lands? Because I think you said that 88% of the tribal lands contain some kind of energy resource, and you mentioned coal. Are there other resources?
Thank you. I'll take a stab at that. With us, with the Southern Utes, we have natural gas, and it's we're one of the largest producers of natural gas in the country. And so that's where a lot of our resources are from. We've got our own companies that on the reservation, off reservation that deal with that. We also have coal. We haven't developed the coal. We've developed the methane underneath it or out of the coal itself. And there's numerous other, as well as like solar power. We've got 300 days of sunlight, wind potential. There's a lot of other energy resources that we could take advantage of there, but we really haven't gotten into yet.
Do you have the infrastructure to, if you're developing solar and wind power, do you have the infrastructure in place where you can sell that power off reservation, off the tribal lands?
We don't, and that's part of the problem in the location. We're really isolated when it comes to infrastructure on a national level, so we're really isolated when it comes to that.
Do you know if any of the Green River Formation are on tribal lands? That'd be northern Colorado, western Colorado, northern Utah, southwestern Wyoming. Do you know if any, I know it wouldn't be your tribal lands, but do you know if any of that's on tribal land?
Not on ours.
That's one of the largest reserves of oil, recoverable oil at Shell in the world. It holds 3 times more recoverable oil than the world's used in the last 100 years. And it's 5 to 6 times the known reserves of the Saudis. Let me ask you this. If given the opportunity to properly develop these energy resources, one of the issues, and it goes back to the jobs issue, it's not just a mining job, but the opportunity for members of your tribes, younger members of the tribes, to take science and math and become energy engineers, experts in the energy field, which I think that needs to be explored and developed.
Right. In Crow country, it's a domino effect. So when development occurs, it also enhances the social well-being to the Crow membership, a sense of living, a sense of pride, as well as a healthy community. And as to Crow, speaking about Crow, the diversification of all the energy, we have 3 major grids coming from the south, east, and west. So if we were to develop the windmill, develop the hydro plant that we have underway, and other green energy developments that are underway, we can have a robust system that we would not depend on the federal government for anything.
Well, I see your ability to develop the resources that you own as a way to not only increase the revenue potential for the tribes, but also to elevate the tribe in terms of professional opportunities, engineers, business people. It could be a tremendous help to the tribe across the board, not just in the laborers who go out and extract the minerals, but those who develop programs for the use of them, and including engineering the infrastructure so that you can move it where it needs to go. My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I recognize the ranking member for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Deschene, I want to thank you for coming here to testify, and you have a large body of work and experience in this area that I'm glad that you're trying to share with us. Mr. Henson, you are correct that I do believe that, and you may have heard in other hearings me talk about unnecessary duplication and really trying to streamline public policy is enormously important. It really impedes development in areas that are least likely to receive it because of bureaucracy. And so in your testimony, based on your experience, you advocate significant increases in federal spending. Specifically, you advocate funding the Office of Indian Energy to $100 million with 25 full-time employees. You also talk about allocating a minimum of $100 million to the Tribal Energy Loan Guarantee Program. Excuse me. What level of funding has been authorized in these last Congresses, roughly for the office and the loan program, while you were serving as director?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Chairman and members of the committee. When I arrived at DOE in 2015, we had a budget authorization from Title V of $20 million for 10 years starting in 2005. The office never received the full amount of the $20 million, at least while I was there. When I arrived, it was given in 15 a $16 million allocation.
So your funding was decreased.
Right.
And how many employees or how many people were staffed at that time?
So at that time, 2 officially, myself and headquarters element support staff. And then from there, we began consolidating the program and presented table organization through HR at DOE, an effort to consolidate.
And how many, what area of land were you three people supposed to be supporting at the Department of Energy for Indian Energy?
So we were charged with the entire United States, including Alaska, with at that time 567 tribes.
So 567 tribes for all of their energy needs. The Department of Energy gave you three, yourself and two other employees, or was it four, you said?
Well, that's currently what you see on the website today, but at our, by 2017, we had grown through consolidating efforts to about a complement of 6 to 7.
Okay, 6 or 7 employees with 20 million, then reduced to $16 million. What would giving 100 million and 25 employees allow you to do?
So with regards to the employees, we have 3 offices, headquarters in DC, the Golden Field office, which handles a lot of the deployment efforts, and then Alaska and Anchorage. So the weight of the program is the deployment effort, which is financial.
So you'd like to get people out there in the field?
Right.
Is what you're saying? And that $100 million would support those salaries as well as the ability for them to go out into
So
the field?
salaries and the administrative would be, and I can't remember the numbers, but it would be on the order of
So
10
how
million.
would that help Chairman Not Afraid as well as Councilman Redd if you were to be able to have that?
For example, if we had a program that supports energy investment, what we call steel-in-the-ground projects. The problem with investing in projects is they're either very small, which DOE currently supports, 50,000 to 250,000 feasibility-type projects, or they're very large in the hundreds of millions. There is not support for programs or development in the range from $5 to $50 million on investments for community-scale energy projects in Indian country.
So, but now, you know, I talked and others have talked about streamlining processes. You're not against streamlining some of these permitting processes?
No, it's needed. It's definitely needed. It's absurd that tribes have to go through additional barriers to get the same type of approvals for energy projects.
But increasing the funding, and particularly the loan funding, would allow you to deploy more support to the tribes to be able to do the things that the chairman was talking
Right.
about.
So larger projects under an Indian loan guarantee program would support more investment. The problem with that, there's two. One, there's a $50,000 requirement under DOE for tribes to put up to begin the application. That's a barrier in itself. Secondly, the current program allows for innovative design and application. That's a barrier in Indian country because we're not looking to prove up technology. We're just looking to apply in remote, distant locations the same technologies that the rest of America enjoys.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the time, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. And at this time, the chair recognizes Mr. Comer for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is to Mr. Henson. In your written testimony, you discussed the untapped resources of tribal lands. 88% of Indian surface lands have resources, but have yet to be developed. Is the complexity of the federal permitting process impacting tribes' ability to use their own land, and if so, how?
It certainly is. I mean, the slide we saw from Councilman Redd illustrates that every marginal decision for outside investment looks at how much time and how much capital will have to be invested here. And if a tribal development is less appealing than a next-door development, you know, that over time, that sends a signal to outside investors to invest not on tribal lands. And, you know, sort of reflecting on the last question also, I think about 2 million acres of surface lands are currently developed, tribal lands, and the measure is something like 15 million undeveloped. There's quite a lot of availability for wind, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric. There's massive capacity for renewable development on tribal lands, and so streamlining those processes could be just tremendous.
I firmly believe the federal government excessive regulatory environment has held us back as a nation from utilizing the resources that we have, especially with the tribes. My question, Chairman Redd and Councilman Not Afraid, how many jobs have been created for members of your tribe as a direct result of energy development projects?
over a period of 40 years, sustainable jobs through development with our partner, Abzalica Westmoreland Mine. We fluctuate anywhere from top of 300 to a bottom of 120. And with other venues and diversification within coal, that's also creating new jobs and with new technologies.
And on the Southern Ute, we do have, I can't give you a direct number or absolute number, but we do have quite a few jobs that are influenced. We have members that work for our own oil and gas companies, and we also have members that work for other companies within the reservation. We also work with San Juan School of Energy, or it's San Juan Community College School of Energy, where we send our employees, our tribal members, and other staff down there to get the training necessary to be fruitful in this formation or in the development of our area. So we don't really put a number on the jobs there, but it for the region itself is huge with the number of jobs that's provided.
Can you gentlemen tell the committee some benefits your tribe has been able to provide members with the revenue produced by developing your energy resources?
Sure, thank you for that question. That's an ideal question only because the revenues that derive off of that coal development ensure that our elder programs continue, scholarships, even in the realm of health, and we talk about the Affordable Care Act. At times, we know that that lacks a lot of issues in itself. So the tribe on the royalty side picks up on that end. So to me, I'm not complaining, but the point is if we could develop more, then we could just entirely take care of ourselves.
Right.
And for us, I mean, we give a distribution to our members every month or throughout the year. We also have health care for all our members, so nothing's denied. We pay for everything. We also have education, so everybody's guaranteed a secondary education if they decide to pursue that. And that's really unheard of when it comes to Indian country is providing all these resources on something that we've got from our natural resources.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay. Thank you, and I'll recognize myself for questioning at this time. And Councilman Redd, I'd like to follow on Mr. Comer's question. Just listening to your testimony and reading the written testimony, it's clear that you've, in the face of some large obstacles, you've still been able to develop these energy resources. Could you talk on a more personal level what it means to an individual family in the Ute Nation when they receive benefits from energy development?
Well, as an individual on the Southern Ute Indian Reservation, I mean, it is huge. It's really hard to put into words. At one point, as in my testimony, we had to stop distribution payments. So we couldn't even afford to pay our members. And for much of my lifetime, that's
what would that mean to a family when they don't get a distribution payment?
There's not a lot of employment on the reservation, so no income means it's second, third world conditions. But because we do have this, and it's made our reservation and families prosperous, and they're able to live a good life. We do run into some problems with the amount of money now coming in, but I would rather have that problem than nothing at all. And it gives a chance for our members to succeed, whether they want to work locally, there's that opportunity, and whether they want to go on to school, they have that opportunity also.
So you've used a couple of words there. Energy development has brought prosperity and success to your people, and clearly that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Chairman Not Afraid, welcome again to a fellow Montanan. We've spent time together in Crow Country, and for whatever reason, we've had limited energy development, and it's clearly your decision as a sovereign nation what you want to do with your energy resources. Could you describe the situation you have in Crow Country today and what additional energy development would mean to the families there?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, there was a study done during the Bush administration that depict approximately $1 trillion worth of asset development prospects. But the Crow tribe at the time couldn't fully implement, only because the government runs on a 2-year cycle at that time. Now with this new constitution that we adopted allows for a 4-year term, because when we do talk about permitting, whether it's a mine, whether it's oil, whether it's a gravel pit, the redundancy of the process takes more time. Therefore, as an elected official, you may not see the fruits of your labor because of the time it takes to develop. Overall, what we have developed is like Southern Ute, where the royalties truly benefit the people. And the government itself does not partake in that. That's a dividend paid out to the people for their share of ownership in the mineral. But if we can continue to develop soundly, again, that's our way out of the hole. And until we recognize or streamline some of these processes, we're at a major disadvantage. Like what was stated earlier by Mr. Henson, a parcel right next door appealing has less restrictions through the state of Montana. Not only that, less fees. So when a developer comes in and sees prime, they tend to be deterred because of fees and time.
If you could explore that a little more, the differences between energy development on private land off the reservation versus development of the tribe's resources on the reservation from a permitting perspective, why does it take so much longer?
Well, first of all, we have this misunderstanding from the federal side. The misunderstanding is private Indian land is treated as federal public land. So individual landowners are subject to the public land laws. And if that was to be differentiated on the purpose of someone owning their own property, why hold them folks down? Because you're deterring them from being prosperous. You're deterring them from utilizing their own mineral. Because I'm not only talking about tribal land, I'm talking about individual tribal members who own mineral assets as well. So them themselves, they can't come up with a $9,600 permitting fee when they need to drill 10 wells. That's $96,000 they have to come up front. Where if it was regulated by the state of Montana, it's like $125.
Yeah, okay. My time has expired, but I think this is a very helpful discussion. I think we'll do another round of questions if that's all right. I this time recognize the ranking member.
Chairman Not Afraid, I was hoping that you could give me if you have proposals that you all have made as to how the regulation should change to allow you. Have you presented those, or is there legislation now that's been proposed by someone from the House or the Senate that would be supportive of what you're talking about?
Yes, currently there is legislation on the books, which was amended the SMACRA law in 2007 that allowed the tribes to administer and regulate their own permitting. But that course of action is also cumbersome because now the conflicts of tribal rules, tribal laws are reviewed by the solicitor's office. And if there is any conflict in CFR, then we have to try to mitigate those issues.
And who has the responsibility to mitigate those?
Interior.
Okay. And so you may not be getting as the movement to be able to get that done as quickly as possible.
Yes, there's a gentleman in the crowd here who was a major proponent of it within our legislative branch named C.J. Stewart, who was an advocate and a proponent of the tribe taking this into their own destiny because when Congress had passed it, it enabled us to, have a vision in taking over this regulatory role as well as permitting, because who better to take care of their own land? Tribes. I have recently done a video with OSM depicting the reclamation on some of our mining grounds that you would never suspect that mining even occurred there. There's vegetation, elk come back on it, antelope, wildlife in general. The aquifers are stabilizing. It's a really neat process. So we always invite people out to show that the Crow have demonstrated good husbandry to its own land.
Correct, I hear you. And then, so what you would do is do the regulations and the regulatory requirements, make the decisions, and then possibly report up to Department of Interior, others on what the decisions were, and they have to respond in a timely fashion?
Right, just another example in this permitting process, for example, in the NEPA requirement, when it requires a cultural survey. What's happening there is you're having a Native American go do a survey and then a non-Native approve that cultural survey. So that's telling me the non-Native knows what a cultural survey is when really they don't even know what a burial site is or any other cultural significance. So as that sits on that table for years, for them to identify what we're telling them what it is, that's part of the cumbersome reality I'm talking about.
So with the proposal, so I'm thinking of ways in which this can be married. So with the proposal that Mr. Deschene have with increasing the number of individuals, those who are culturally sensitive, who are possibly Native American, and be able to be out in the field in greater number, be something along with having the rights of the tribe to make those decisions, be one that you think is something that would work well?
Yes, and I truly believe because of treaty purposes, it's a even though we call it nation to nation, it's big brother, little brother. That's how I view it. And if
Listen, someone living in an unincorporated territory understands that completely, what that feels like. Yeah.
yes, and the good thing is that I see is that as we shed more light on these issues, there are people willing to take the time to say, okay, what can we do about this? So we've provided solutions. We've also demonstrated whether we had to recruit technical staff just to ensure that practices are being done professionally.
So can I ask also, when you talk about some of these permitting, I know in the Virgin Islands, we face permitting that's not just related to the Army Corps, to National Marine Fisheries, to multiple agencies that have to do permitting process. Are you facing those same issues as well?
Yes, we are, because Interior, again, has to pawn off to the other sister departments for those oversights. So even though Interior gets bashed a lot, really, that's the wrong people to really bash on, because they have recently, in turn of events, they've been proponents of tribes, yet the process is still remain the same, where those other sister agencies, such as BLM, have to tell us, yeah, that is a cultural site.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I'll recognize myself for a final round of questioning. I really want to focus on what do we do next. I'm played football in high school. We won games by running 3 to 5 yard plays, and you've brought very constructive suggestions today. Chairman Not Afraid, you talked about the obstacles you face when tribal land is treated as public land, raising the regulatory burden. There was some testimony about clarifying the terror rules. These are very specific things that we can investigate. So for all of the members on the panel, I want to ask you, you've brought good suggestions. What are the top 3 things you think we ought to do? And again, in terms of making it easier for tribes to determine the best way to develop the resources on your reservations. So who would like to start? What are the 3 things we ought to do? Chairman?
Thank you, Chairman. One of the first things that I see that Crow tribe would believe would be paramount is allowing the tribes to, again, administer and regulate on its own. The purpose of that would not only expedite development, but it would ensure that we have sound practices beginning within our reservation, because we've seen in the past where some other developments, whether it's a gravel pit or what have you, the feds had not done their trust responsibility, therefore there were abandoned mines. But if the tribe was in the driver's seat, we would have made sure that those were reclaimed. We would have made sure that all the archaeological surveys were done or completed prior to disturbances of burial sites or cultural sites.
Okay. Mr. Henson?
I think the overarching thing is this, what I'd call the two-prong approach. It's continued reliance on tribal decision-making, but also funding the liaison roles to the kind of levels we've been hearing about today, because the federal government can bring some real technical expertise to assist, or as opposed to sort of serving as a roadblock. There are a number of legislative ideas out there. Let's let this tribe, let's let Navajo have the right to lease its surface lands without as much approval. But that's very conservative. It's one tribe, one strata of the possible energy development rights. And so a lot of the moves forward are just kind of baby steps. And so I would argue that the current situation is developed through a whole lot of, I guess the technical term would be CYA kind of maneuvers. We'll layer fish and wildlife over interior, over energy, and you end up with multiple sort of overlapping jurisdictions.
So the suggestion, Mr. Henson, is just to streamline the number of agencies that are involved.
A little bit, yes. If we can find like this sort of one-stop shop and actually make it work without being an additional layer in when a tribe has to go out and interface with the federal government. And then I'm personally an advocate for things akin to the contracting and compacting that we've seen in a number of tribal areas. I think the federal government should find some resources for block grants to tribes. I mean, block grants to the Southern Ute to hire a geologist if they need one, or some more sort of third-party contracting where tribes can tap into technical expertise outside of the BIA, outside of tribal employees, but just kind of out there in the marketplace.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Henson. Councilman Redd?
Thank you. I think number one for us is S-245. That is the closest to being complete, and I think that goes to what we want to see. Also, when it comes to us, when it comes to expertise, we have the expertise in place. We've been doing this for many years. So when it comes to the permitting process, from beginning to end, we do that ourselves. It's all in-house. We have our NEPA specialists, we have our cultural resources, we have our natural resources, we have our energy department. We take care of all that in-house. The only thing we wait on is a signature from the Department of the Interior. And that's where we're reaching the delays. I mean, one signature shouldn't take 3 years to get. And also with that, I mean,
in your opinion, does S-245 fix that problem?
it helps. It helps, yeah. And I mean, there's not one overall solution out there currently, but it would really definitely get us moving in the right direction.
Okay, thank you.
And then also streamlining the NEPA process, really clarifying and making some clarifications there, because treating tribal lands as public lands, I mean, does not work for Indian tribes. And also the one NEPA process, I think would go a long way, instead of each department or each, I guess it would be department, having their own NEPA process. So there'd be one defined NEPA process.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Deschene.
Deschene, thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. At DOE, we had a working group. It's called the Indian Country Energy Infrastructure Working Group. Tribal leaders from all over the country, including Alaska. They determined and decided that the #1 policy priority is finding capital or access to resources to help spur energy development. Notwithstanding what all the leaders here on the panel mentioned, those are all good recommendations. But if we want to jumpstart energy development, we can deal with the bureaucracy and the laws. We can work on that. A lot of good attorneys in the room that can help with that. But we need the capital, and we need business partners. And so my recommendation would be, it's time for an energy legislation to be approved by Congress. So S-245 or whatever the vehicle is, the process is there for the tribes to input on it. Secondly, in keeping with the investment, DOE, DOI needs to have an energy loan guarantee program like we have in other agencies, but for energy and not conditioned on the application fee, and it needs to be allowed to be deployed, existing technologies, and deployed in remote and distant areas of the country. And then finally, I would say that Congress has the power, working with the White House and OMB, to fund these offices at an amount that makes a difference. You need more staff. You need more energy resources to provide for grants, capacity building, education. And so I would say those are the first fix, and then you can build from there.
Okay, I'm going to indulge myself and ask one last question. For Chairman Not Afraid and Councilman Redd, has the creation of the Indian Energy Service Center produced any improvements from a regulatory process?
For Southern Ute, no. And it's still, we haven't utilized that. I guess it kind of falls in the category of Terra. It's out there, but we haven't taken
Okay.
advantage of it.
Thank you. Chairman Not Afraid?
I see some advantages of it, but our priorities had been coal, where we identified the SMACRA, where it streamlined some things for the tribes to operate, but we always ended up at that same barrier of waiting on sister agencies on approving things. But back to the question, we haven't tried that.
Okay. And are you gentlemen familiar with the service center and the concept of trying to bring the agencies together? Would bringing more agencies into the service center, do you think BIA is equipped to play the role of a lead agency for tribal permitting?
To be frank, I believe the tribe can handle its own permitting. And for other tribes, I believe that would be a great start. As far as the Crow tribe, just like with our brothers to the south there, the Ute, already established their permitting processes. And if we engage in that, then what was the sense in us developing our own systems?
Yeah. Councilman Redd?
Thank you. I think for Southern Ute, I mean, it's a no for the shop. I think that we are equipped to deal with our own resources, and I think the more agencies that get involved, the more muddied the waters get, and you don't have one clear direction. Maybe if you had one clear direction and definitions in there, it may work, but until that time, I think we're best equipped to take over that role.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony today. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit an opening statement or questions for the record. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.